Hello, MB Polypod. I can't help but dance. I'm sorry. I just love our intro music. I don't know. Welcome, MB Poly World, to our podcast. Another week, another batch of information flying at you. For those of you who did not think New Brunswick politics was interesting, I beg to differ. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Joanna Killen, and we are here in Minnequist on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoq, and the Pascatomacati, and Minnequist, also St. John, New Brunswick. Welcome, Joe, and welcome back.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I got a cool new headset. Oh, yeah.
Dude,
Rocking it.
sounds great.
Hopefully it sounds good, better than the old iPhone ones. We're very grassroots around here, that's for sure.
Oh, the budget's just crazy for this
Huge.
podcast. I don't know what you mean.
It's huge. So, yeah, just great to be back here. We have another full agenda for today. Lots is going on. It's been a really precocious start to the month of April with a lot of taxes dropping. So, as our little intro showed, there's a bit of a curse going on around here, and we're going to talk about it. Some from the astrological world would say eclipse season and Mercury retrograde, etc., etc. Maybe the root cause of some of that.
I do believe Pluto has an opinion about what's going on in our current
political space, absolutely, as usual.
Well, yeah. Well, I also, like, full disclosure, right off the top, the curse of NB Poly. This is an attempt to goad the Curse of Politics podcast, because it's so funny. Because when I was getting ready for this pod, because you and I have been trying to wheel like 4 guests onto this podcast.
Yeah.
In the past 3 weeks, we've just had no luck.
Everyone's on vacation. Everyone's on cool vacations.
I know, like Kelly Lamrock and TG Harvey and another gentleman that we wanted to get on to talk about media in the landscape of media of New Brunswick, and we just have had no luck. So this week I was like, okay, what the hell are we going to talk about? There's always lots to talk about, but I was like, you know what? I'll make sure I listen to the Curse of Politics today, and I'll make sure I listen to the Peter Mansbridge podcast today at the Bridge, just to get some inspiration about what's going on. And when you know it, I'm listening to the Curse of Politics, and David Hurley's given his whole, song and dance about here's what we're going to get into today. And he's like, we're going to cover the 3 elections that are going to happen this year between British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and of course yours truly, New Brunswick.
What? No one ever talks about us.
We're the size of Mississauga, for Christ's sake. No one cares at all. And it's I need to write down when I swear from now on, according to our Rogers TV people, and so I'll write that down so that we can at least bleep it out in the what do they call it?
Captions.
Captions. Thank you.
Yes.
Anyway, so I'm listening along to Curse, and they're minute 55, 1 hour, and there's only 1 hour and 8 minutes. I'm like, they aren't even they're gonna spend like 20 seconds on New Brunswick politics, and this is gonna suck. But they got to it, and they're like, oh, we don't even have time to talk about Saskatchewan and New Brunswick. We'll get to that next week. There's not much to say about Saskatchewan. Those were their last words. So I'm going to attempt, and we're going to blitz this on social media. We're going to tag them. We're going to call them out. I'm going to do everything I can to try to get their attention.
I know you've been begging for their attention for like a year now, and I know you've had a bit of an exchange with David Hurley, and he is very fun to listen to. I say he's your podcast idol, if you had one, like the guy you admire the most. I'd say very loyal to him.
I am loyal to that show for sure, because I don't agree with what those say.
A lot to write down here, sir.
Okay, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 44. But I do like, because they force me outside of my silo. And full disclosure, we are a young political pundit. We're in a young political pundit position. I love that alliteration that you just did. That is, yes, we are. We're both in our 30s.
Yeah,
we're both elected officials. You're running for provincial politics. We're in a really tiny province. Yeah. We are the only political podcast in New Brunswick that is consistently going. the manifesto's long gone. It hasn't been around for a while. Um, the Carr Brothers podcast doesn't just cover politics. It gets into all kinds of stuff.
It's true.
But like,
We're very loyal to the political space and what's going on around here. And I think to, the national podcasts, point, there's not a lot to cover here. So I kind of like our choice of title for this week because it is kind of we have a bit of a curse
yeah,
around us when it comes to being noticed by larger media sources. Even our elections are really rarely covered by like CTV Atlantic. Like you won't really see a big election night kind of thing, maybe on CBC, but I don't think that they've sort of like took the foot off the gas when it comes to covering New Brunswick political things, really.
yeah, and Bell Media's cutting jobs, and there's no one
Yeah.
left, of course,
Yeah.
right? But let's just say this. I think if there ever was a time to pay attention to the New Brunswick election, it would be this election cycle. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, we have seen mass emigration from Ontario and immigration. I mean, international,
Yeah.
intranational immigration, and whatever we call it, emigration. I don't even know what the right term is right now. I can't think. But we've seen thousands of people from Ontario move here, even, especially even just our city,
Well,
thousands.
the latest is we've gone over the 850,000, and I
Yeah,
believe we were on this podcast, so it's not even in the last year or so
that's
that we were
right.
talking about when we hit the 800,000 mark.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've grown more as a province by population in the past 3 years than we have the past 30 years.
Yep.
And so there's a changing narrative. We've got one of Canada's fastest growing ports. We
Mm.
hold a key to unlocking major onshoring opportunity for our manufacturing because of that deep water interconnected rail system that's all through the United States from here in St. John, with a large port, with an LNG, with the country's largest refinery, and all this stuff. Like, we have a bunch of that's just St. John. New Brunswick has a bunch of other pieces going for it, low property values, in an era where people can work from anywhere and all of that. Like, you can buy a property in Edmundston for $260,000 and
Oh
still
yeah,
be.
we're all over TikTok. We are all over TikTok as the cheapest place to live in the country.
That's yeah, and so I think there's a time it's time that the friggin' country paid attention to us
Yeah.
and our politics, and our politics looks a lot more like British Columbia than it does the rest of the country, because we have the Green Party, which is like nipping at the heels of, and I don't mean we look as in we're as progressive as Ontario or as British Columbia. We aren't as progressive. We're pretty conservative. We're pretty rural, and people are pretty set in their ways, let's say. But we are in a weird position where the NDP are nowhere to be found. They're dead. Dominic Carty threw a grenade in the room on the way out as his leader before he defected to the PCs, before he then turned around and stabbed Blaine Higgs in the back as his education minister and left the party and now sits as an independent. So here's a character, a singular personality who has moved through the New Brunswick political spectrum. And Fred Eaglesmith, anybody who likes Fred Eaglesmith who's listening to this podcast, please let me know. High five goes out to you. A tip of my hat, as Stephen Colbert would say, to you. But as Fred Eaglesmith, he has a song. She's a summer storm. I'm a hurricane. One just blows through town. The other one blows the town away. Dominic Carty blew the town away in many ways. And I don't like the guy, but nonetheless, it's like that's the political atmosphere we have. We have new people. We have parties that shouldn't exist that are nipping at the heels of power because they've been in a position of power before by holding the balance of power when there was a minority government just a few
Yep.
years ago. We're seeing the Liberals that aren't necessarily breaking through the anti-liberal rhetoric that is national right now, and Susan Holt's fundraising numbers are not high. We're going to pick up where we left off last week around the housing debate and what Susan Holt's putting in the window there, but also where the PCs are at and the Greens or where they're not at, whatever. So I think, add your own flavor here. I think if there ever was a time for people to pay attention to this little province politically, it's now.
I know, agreed. It's why we can't trust the polls, and I've never been a huge fan of polling. As anyone who's a longtime listener will know, you can't predict very well with what you're looking at right now. We just had another PC MLA incumbent
Yeah,
who has been in for 25 years, Trevor
yeah,
Holder, from here in St. John, declare his retirement. He gave a great 16-minute speech that we listened to. You can find on YouTube, where he mentions my dad, which is very sweet.
yeah. That's
Um,
right.
with regards to the St. John Harbor cleanup project. And I was talking to him a little bit about that and how big of a deal that was at the time, because St. John for the previous, 100 years had just been letting raw sewage flow into, into the freaking harbor.
Hmm.
So finally, between like a pretty significant bilateral agreement between them and the feds, like got that done. And Trevor had a lot to do with it. He was the environment minister at the time. This guy has been very loyal to his riding and described in his speech this very deep legacy of conservatism in his family, um, with his mother sort of driving that. And it was a really cool speech because he's seen a lot. And one of the main, I think, points he was trying to make is that government is run through relationships and not asserting power. And I thought there was some interesting, like minor little polite jabs at the premier and his particular brand of politics. And where Trevor explained he'd be in big fights with liberals on the floor and then have dinner afterwards, kind of thing.
Yeah,
And we don't really see that in our current makeup. Everything's very divisive. And I think you can speak a little bit about your conversations with somebody in the community who was talking a lot about divisive leadership and what that can look like.
yeah,
So, I think that's why New Brunswick politics is something to watch, because we've gone from a little bit more of a, they're just chugging along down there, what's to see here kind of vibe, to wow, we're firing up Christian nationalists and we're getting like some wild things going and no one's really paying attention. And then when this election arrives, I think we're going to be and people outside of here are going to go, what the hell just happened in New Brunswick? Why is this such an intense election? Like, where did this go haywire? When you have a party who, now I think we're topping over a third of very long time MLAs are all leaving. Like, how can any poll predict what's going to happen with that?
yeah. And the polls are sorry. Don't worry, Rogers. I'll not swear in this moment.
Lies.
The polls are just a nonsense at this point because um, we're first of all, the polls are like 400 people,
Hmm.
small sample set, and second of all, you know, the way they frame their conversation with those 400, which are telephone interviews, which as we've seen and we've heard from very in-depth pollsters from Abacus Data, from 538 Politics down in the States, talk about the problem of phone call polling. It just doesn't grab us, the demographic of younger millennials, or which is now one of the biggest voting blocks, and it doesn't grab especially some of these new people who are coming here from Ontario because their
Yeah.
numbers aren't listed as New Brunswick numbers. How many times in the run of a week do you get a phone call from somebody and it's an Ontario number, but it's somebody who just wants to talk to you? Like, I get it at least 2 or 3 times a week.
Wants to talk to me. No, most of the time it's like, just some random spammy thing. Like,
Oh yeah, I know, but like
yeah.
even in our role as counselors,
Oh, yes.
I'll get a call from a 519 number or a um
Oh, yeah,
um
for sure. Because actually
yeah,
they don't wanna get NB numbers because they're
no.
way more expensive than
Yeah,
all the other carriers across. I have friends who lived in New Brunswick for quite some time who will not give up their Quebec numbers because it is a outrageous amount more to get a cell phone deal here in New Brunswick. So, yeah, you should keep your out of province numbers because
yeah,
it's a lot less expensive.
yeah, exactly. And some
Yeah.
people just have that what's the postal code outside Toronto, the 516 or the 5
Oh, 416. But then there's the
416?
905.
The 905, yeah.
Yeah,
There's a few of these different numbers
yeah,
that people are like, "Ooh, I got one of the last ones. I don't want to give it up."
yeah.
Anyway, I'm just saying the
416 is the Drake one. Like,
yeah,
that's
it's
reasonable.
just people aren't giving up those numbers. They're not
No.
being reached by narrative research, who's the only one doing much polling out here. I will say though, the Angus Reid forum did one. We covered that a few weeks ago with Sean Rouse. I
Yeah.
think I think the fact that, and I'll say this again, I've said it before, the fact that those have New Brunswickers giving us the lowest approval rating, giving the lowest approval rating for government interaction on like 7, 8 files is a very telling feature. I would love to know what the current, especially Corey Tenike, I'd love to know what Corey Tenike thinks of that, because his boy Steve Outhouse is down here trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat and a miracle out of a, a backwoods country province he knows nothing about from Ottawa.
Oh, I need to rant about him for a minute because I think this dawned on me the other day when we were walking somewhere that this man is getting paid no matter what happens. So, like,
Problem of consultants.
I know. And so, like, he just bothers me so much because it feels like the monorail guy from The Simpsons, where he's like blown into town, not blowing the town away, blown into town, Gil Morgan, and has like probably promised the premier the world that he will pull this off. This is going to be it. We're going to have a greatest monorail there ever was. And this probably won't happen for him. And he'll have spent a bunch of PC money, and Steve will go back to Steve hasn't even left Ottawa, because if you go to his bio, it's like looks like he's still there. It's not like he's like coming down here and hanging out all the time. So the man gets to work remotely, make a bunch of New Brunswick bank, and it doesn't really matter either way whether he wins or loses. And he can just like come in here and throw grenades all over the province, get everyone riled up, cause havoc, and then go home to his suburb in Ottawa. Like, it just, is that not monorail, man? Like, is that not the archetype?
I
Like, you
mean,
can't argue with me on that.
I don't think I can argue with you on that, because at the end of the day, and for those of you who don't know, here it is, the Mr. Monorail himself, famous Simpsons episode. You need a monorail, Springfields, and he convinces the town to build a monorail, and it's the
Fredericton,
whole
St. John, Moncton, like
yeah.
Miramichi, like
Hear me out.
that is it. Like, it really is promising.
And if we were to put a meme behind this, put your party on the map. It's like Steve, I'm sorry. The progressive conservative premier for New Brunswick just lost more MLAs. I think this is true. I have to double check the history here. But he just lost more incumbent MLAs heading into an election as a majority government than Richard Hadfield lost in the 80s. 80s? Yeah, in the 80s, leading into the Frank McKenna era, the red wave. Just lost more MLAs than Hadfield did when Hadfield was arrested for possession of marijuana when the Queen was visiting for Christ. Like, you can't make this up. This is where we're at. And Steve Outhouse, being this former pastor, like he has attracted some of these Christian nationalist types like Fétine Grisecci, who is a nightmare for this party, has no lineage here, has no heritage here, has no connection here. Phil Hutchins is somebody who's been rumored is going to be running in Harbor. We've talked about that before. It's a rumor. I have no clue. I've just heard it. Who knows? But, this guy, allegedly, was arrested for breaking COVID lockdowns and had a church meeting in King Square with no kind of heads up to the community or the municipality on that. And they're just like the type of people they're putting in the window. It's like they say when an empire collapses, the emperor is the last one to believe it's true. That's what we're seeing here. When you see the grand exodus of now almost 12, I believe, MLAs that are saying they are not going to reoffer for Blaine. And I mean, we can go through some major ones. Like, you have dynasty level MLAs here, like Trevor Holder, who are not reoffering, like Jeff Carr. You've got Dorothy Shepherd. Like, that's just, a few recent ones. We have a suspicion. Arlene Dunn also just stepped down. She was new to the game, but she was headhunted by the progressive conservatives to run against yours truly.
I feel like the bubble is real, though, that he's put himself into, and it just doesn't feel like anyone else is being listened to in any significant way, except for these sort of outsiders and these people that are blowing through town and will have very little allegiance to the party in order to grow and build
Yes,
those ridings. Like, I don't really think that these people are going to stick around and make sure, like, if they lose, if they don't win this round,
that's
to
right.
make sure that those ridings are strong and good for the next person. Like, that's what you saw with these incumbents who took all that time to make sure that their riding associations were strong.
And
It's
they're leaving.
wild.
And
Yep.
Danielle Len's gone. And
Yep.
like, oh my gosh, who are we forgetting? Ross Wetmore's gone.
Yeah.
Like, there's a bunch of PC MLAs.
Gary Crossman.
Gary Crossman's gone. There's
Yep.
19 riding associations that have called for the leadership review. Erica Hashi seems to be the yes woman who's just going to hold the reins and keep it going.
It's the bubble.
We know that Christian nationalist groups have funneled money into the Blaine Higgs
No.
campaign.
And
I've seen,
we've talked about like Jesus Christ Superstar in here, and it's Easter. It's like my yearly time
yeah.
to rewatch that.
Well,
And
who else
yeah.
has got that tradition is David Hurley.
No
Hilarious.
way! Oh
No,
my
yeah.
God.
Shout out to David for having the same tradition as you, watching Jesus
I
Christ Superstar.
Yes, 1970s version. It's the only one.
That's right.
And it's actually it's funny because I was Googling and I found one that was like a whole cast of women. It was friggin' amazing. But it's like I think Jesus would be so mad if he came back and saw that this was what was going on in his
Oh,
name. And that's what
yeah.
strikes me every year in watching it is like that's a story of oppression. That's a story of somebody going against the grain and fighting for people who are marginalized. And like that's not what we're seeing with this group that is putting up the Easter messages and freaking out. Steve Otto's freaking out at the Veterans Affairs for calling it a March holiday because they're trying to
Yeah.
be inclusive. Like, I love that Texas guy, the Texas senator who was like state senator, who said if Jesus wanted a theocracy, he would have had one.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
so
If we
everybody who
were a
thinks
Christian nation,
yeah,
we would have health care for everybody
yeah,
readily accessible, and we'd
yeah,
have no child unfed or
yeah,
no unhoused person. And
yeah,
like he goes on and on in the
it's so
pulpit,
good.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's so good. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Like, I want to know what the Curse of Politics panel thinks about this.
yes.
And this is our question to them. This is our challenge. Curse of Politics, demonstrate that you can get beyond the Ottawa bubble, the insufferable opinion that Toronto and Ottawa hold the fortunes of this entire nation within the palm of their bureaucratic hands.
No.
Please help us weigh into this. Give us your honest take. Do a couple hours. Listen to some podcasts that we put out because our observations are rarely grassroots, really on the ground here, and they're not bulletproof. God, please riddle them with holes of challenge. We can take it, but I think the thing that we can't figure out right now, you and I are saying, is why make this play? Why ruin? It looks like the PCs are heading to a ruinous outcome. And then at a national level, why would Pierre Poilievre choose to
Yeah.
come here and give the old high five to Blaine when, like, I mean, maybe we will. We have certainly not seen Pierre Poilievre do that with Doug Ford.
Yeah, there's record debt going on in Ontario.
Yep.
The austerity culture is not the same as it is here, and the surpluses are non-existent. So
I mean, conservatives and progressive conservatives writ large in this country should basically be holding New Brunswick up as the poster child of their entire philosophical underpinnings,
yes,
right? Because we have 6 years of balanced budgets with surpluses, all to bear on that. But we have some of the worst opinions about where this province is at on
and outcomes on like
on
healthcare and everything.
healthcare,
Yeah,
on so many fronts, housing, homelessness, social issues. Like the Angus Reid Forum put out that, and I was surprised by how bad it was. Like I knew it was bad here, but way more than the narrative research polling, which surprised me as well. But because it held Blaine still in some position of power on the raw polling numbers,
yeah.
I
Well, we
looked at
know.
that and I was like, that doesn't line up. When you lose this many incumbents and you start to, surrender that incumbency advantage in a change cycle election, you're now on your back foot twice,
Yeah,
right? Not only are you fighting the natural inertia in our political system, which is to replace the government every 6 to 8 years, depending on if it's minority majority. But like, we don't often get a repeat majority government, and then we don't often get a repeat minority after a majority government like that. So we goes against that historical analysis, but then you don't even maintain your incumbency advantage.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's a problem. And
People are so sick of politics, like,
yeah,
so sick of it. So speaking of the biggest elephant in the room right now, like, I'd love to
yes,
move on to the carbon tax debate that's happening. Like, April
sounds good.
1st was a big day, um, for many reasons, not just because the carbon tax was increased by 23%, but which we talked a bit about last week. But there also was what we call the Higgs beer tax. It's gone up. With 2.4s have never been this pricey as they are now.
Yeah.
An ANBL price increase has happened. There also is a rumor they're starting to charge for boxes, which is such a bizarre cost recovery strategy. I do not know why they would be doing
Alcohol,
that.
yeah, and alcohol New Brunswick, ANBL,
Yeah,
the alcohol New Brunswick
liquor commission, something.
LC. They call it
Yeah,
the LC in Nova Scotia, and I've
yeah,
always kept that. But the ANBL has declared record
profits, right?
surplus. You can't create profits in a nonprofit. They're not a
Right.
for-profit
They're
entity.
Crown Corporation.
They're
Yeah,
Crown Corp. So it just gets absorbed into their operational budget
yeah.
to improve or to make the taxpayers some money back. But like, yeah, there's an interaction there that's
A little bizarre.
staggering,
And
because that is a federal tax, is it not?
yeah, there's a beer tax going on with it, but there was also a price increase that came from the province.
Ah, right.
The other piece was the um the MB Power increase, where we have a guy who was actually hired to look at this, wrote 140 pages on it. His name's Duncan Madsen. Evidence statement delivered to the NB Energy and Utilities Board last week that said the rate increase of 9.25% is neither required nor in the public interest. So he was saying basically that was an outrageous decision that was also made to increase everyone's cost of living. And so, but the
Also,
third thing,
their own provincial gas tax, which they're not
yes,
eliminating. Yep.
Right, like, and that's the thing. Like, Higgs has very much all the power in the world to reduce the price of gasoline with the gasoline adjuster that is still sitting there intact right now. So, but let's show everybody the little is the carbon tax actually increasing our grocery costs?
All right, we gotta. Okay, if we're gonna go that way, let's go full fledged. I have a bone to pick with society.
Oh, really?
Um, and it's a similar bone that I've been picking forever. And like, I know if Jordan Leichnitz and Corey and everybody's still listening to the podcast at this point, I mean, first of all, high five. Second of all, you're gonna roll your eyes and just call me an idealist, and that's not how politics work. And people are dumb and they vote.
I
You
just
know,
thought you were a socialist in
they
hiding.
pick parties like they pick pants, all that stuff. I know, I've heard it, but for the love of God, the two things. One, the carbon tax is not changing our life like people want to say it is. It's easy to believe that it is.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like believing in a flat earth, right? Like, it's easy to see how flat earthers will get up and like they'll do all this weird acrobats to convince you about how the flat earth is feasible and
Mhm.
maybe, and it's like there's conspiracies out there. Like, it's, to me, the idea that the carbon tax, which has been advertised for multiple years about this increase, is it's changing your world, is nonsense, right? But okay, people are going to believe what they believe. Let's look at some raw numbers here, as you're suggesting we do, which I
Yes.
like that. Let's look at some raw numbers. Let's see how much it's affecting one of the most important areas, which is grocery bills. We're all frustrated about that.
Yes.
So, here we have, for those of you looking at this, let's look at bread, right? So on a truck that's moving bread, just selling bread, you have I think this is looking at an average. You're looking at around 12,636 not pieces of bread, but units of bread,
Yeah.
right?
Loaves.
Loaves and whatever thrown in there. The carbon tax cost per 1,000 kilometers is $53.
And this is like imagining your bread is actually traveling 1,000 kilometers, which
Yeah.
is kind of an outrageous, unless you're somewhere very far off.
For democratic localists like myself
Yeah.
that just yearn for a world in which we onshore all of our industries, like making bread locally. Yeah, this is a nightmare, but it does happen. Of course it does. Big warehouses and commercial
Yeah.
endeavors make
Just
tons and
look at
tons of bread.
outskirts of Toronto. It's crazy.
Yeah, just spanking bread everywhere in the province, or in the country. Yeah, like you're looking at $53. So it's 1,400 kilometers to Toronto from
Right.
here.
Yeah.
So if a loaf of bread was made in Toronto, it pays about $60 in the carbon tax, which works out to be around
Less
4
than a
cents.
yeah,
It's
no,
like,
less than a quarter of a cent per unit.
well, yeah, it's yes, it is like a
Quarter
quarter of
of a cent. So
yes,
1/25th of 1 cent.
0.0042. That's the
Yeah.
number, right? If we were looking at, boxes of cereal, 3,100 of those on a truck, $53 per 1,000 kilometers. That's
1
uniform, the
cent.
same. It's around 1.7 cents, right?
Yeah.
Looking at milk, 1.4 cents. Looking at eggs, it's a quarter of a cent. Looking at coffee, it's about a third of a cent. Like, I mean, this stuff, people want to dispute it all they want, but it's easy to believe, well, the carbon tax went up 18% or it went up all this. It's like, and that's accounting for all the price increases that you're facing. In order to believe that, in order for people to believe, and I know we're having a conversation, this is what we do. We have a conversation about the ought to be's versus the what is. But here is my unifying field theory, as Scott Reed likes to say. Again, I'm goading the curse of politics. I'm mentioning you over and over again because I want you to interact with us. The unifying field theory I would have is that if you put an issue in the window, like the carbon tax and like being anti the carbon tax, when you've run 2 elections against the carbon tax, well, one for sure, and
Mhm.
one sort of not saying anything about it, when you've been opposed to it and lost before, and the information, the meme culture that's out there that's supporting that organic thinking, like like you and I know this, there are thousands of memes on Facebook right
Yeah.
now that I can click that basically hold up straw man versions of the carbon tax and
Yeah.
accuse the straw man of causing an earthquake on planet Earth in
We s
impact.
we can show you the protests that blocked highways this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. There are people who have grabbed onto this narrative, but
Mhm.
I dare say when the narrative is this weak in its positioning, like when it only takes a 20-minute interaction
Mhm.
to dispel some of these myths about
Yeah.
what the carbon tax does. And when there's an equally believable alternative theory that is being held up by small amounts of people, but we are seeing it here in New
Yeah.
Brunswick. We are seeing people hold up this idea that, hey, it isn't it isn't the carbon tax, it's
No.
corporate greed.
Yeah.
It's corporate greed. Why? Because Loblaws is being taken to court for price fixing on bread prices. Loblaws canceled hero pay when they said, that we were
Yeah.
paying our employees all this extra. Loblaws paid Galen Weston $11.7 million last year, who's their president. Now he stepped down.
Well, the guy's new name is PER Bank. The dude's name's Bank. And in his first 6 months, he's already made like $8 million in bonuses. Steve Boots, another amazing online commentator, did a great breakdown of all the ungodly amounts of money that man has made since he's been employed since October. So
And Steve Boots is from Saskatchewan. So
yes, he is.
another, if you curse politics, if you're going to listen to somebody this week, alternative with a big following, go listen to Steve Boots.
Yeah.
Um, but let's look at the journey of one CEO, just one CEO for one company. Now that company owns a lot of other companies, right? Loblaws basically owns what is it, like 40%, 33%, some
Yeah.
ungodly amount of the industry of grocery stores and chains.
Yeah.
So if you're like, well, I don't shop at I don't shop at a
You
superstore.
probably do.
It's No Frills. It's
Yeah.
um,
Shoppers Drug Mart.
Shoppers Drug Mart. There's a bunch of them, right?
Yep.
So at $11.7 million, okay, that's just in income. And a lot of that's bonuses for their president and CEO. This is one person. Let's look at that, what that translates to. $11.7 million is $226,000, right?
What do you mean?
Sorry, I'm looking at my number here. It's getting
Yeah.
dark and I can't see it. It's around 220. It's $226,000 per month.
Right.
No, it's more than that. Sorry, I'm reducing that down. Sorry, down to the hourly wage. If we were to say he works 60 hours a week, let's say he's like, this boy is pounding it at both ends, burning the midnight oil, he's making $3,778 an hour.
Lovely.
You know what you can buy for 3,000? Let's say we paid Galen Weston $500 an hour. Let's just say we gave him like an average lawyer's salary to do whatever the hell he does, because he doesn't drive the truck, he doesn't grow the food, he doesn't manage the store, and he sure as hell does not, run the office.
No.
So whatever the hell he does, here is a guy who can make that kind of money in this kind of climate. You know how many nurses we could buy with that, carpenters we could buy, like problems we could solve. So as soon as you start to hear people like Charlie Angus and others start to hold up this theory, I think we've put it in the window far too soon, like the conservatives had. Put it in the window far too soon for it to pay off. I think people are going to start to wise up to this. And
I
I
hope
think,
so. Like Melissa Lantzman, the deputy, is tied to Walmart. Jenny Byrne, the campaign manager for Pierre Polyev, is a Loblaws lobbyist. Like, these are people that are now going up against the children's lunch program bill that they were trying to get passed.
yeah,
Like, they were trying to get 20 billion, I think it was, something like that, to like make sure all the kids were fed, but they gave like 40 billion in subsidies to oil and gas last year. Like, it's outrageous what
yeah,
they are willing to go to bat for and what they aren't. And that's why when I see these working class folks out for Pierre Polyev, I'm like, he's gonna you over. Like, he is not your friend, and he's using you right now. And it sucks to see that the man can create a bit of a marketing machine around a silly little tax that literally is just coming right back to you, either in the form of upgrading your home to be greener or in the form of a check. It's just, it's freaking sad. And you're seeing people like weaponize words like woke, like they weaponize, like if you're a child, being called like a nerd or a geek, like being smart meant you were, a target. And now being woke, being somebody who cares about the climate, who cares about other people, like, is being weaponized as if it's a bad thing. And like the way we are like gunning for each other is just, it's wild, and it's not based in fact. Like, it
no.
just isn't.
And that's to your point. None of this like hate on the carbon tax is based in fact.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, as much as climate change is not the number one issue right now any longer, it's still something a lot of people think about and inherently want to do something about. And
Yeah.
I don't think we haven't seen any alternatives that are really catchy. So we'll see. But would you say that this anti-carbon tax cohort out there that is flying these flags, that's your beef right now?
That's a big beef. What's your beef?
There we go. Which leads me to my next point. What's your beef? Thank you to
Yeah.
Steve.
Thanks, Steve. We met in
Our
person, which is
this
so
is
cool.
this is how we know that like the MB Poly podcast is worth doing. We're out for a walk at Rockwood Park here, and somebody just stops us. It's like, Brent, Joanna, MB Poly Pod. Hey, I listen to you guys every week, and we're like, what? No
Like,
way.
thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, and
appreciate
Steve is the
that.
one. Steve is the one that found the Easter egg in last week's podcast where I said, Can anybody remind me about what that show was that had that segment on it about
And it
what's
was
your
Street Sense. It
and
was
it was
freaking
Street
Street
Sense,
Sense.
CBC Street Sense, which we all watched,
Yes,
which was
yes.
awesome. And
It was awesome.
the funny thing about that one was the one that he found actually was one from the 90s
Yeah,
that
95.
had to do with shrinkflation. I kid you not. If
They
you
were making,
didn't
like,
think
chocolate bars and bags of chips, like, have
that's right.
smaller amounts in it for the same price.
If you did
Like,
not believe
age.
that history repeats itself, go watch on the NB. We got tagged in it. It's on our Twitter, March 29th. Morgan on What's Your Beef on CBC Street Sense 1995 96, and it's all about bags of chips being reduced in weight but sold at the same price and all this stuff.
Oh, yeah, just
Um,
amazing. It's like, you feel like, again, this Groundhog Day concept we've talked about. It's like, "Oh,
yes,
it's gonna have to keep dealing with the same
I know.
forever."
Um, but to bring it back to the political landscape and the political, intrigue, I'd say, we have a litmus test here. Pierre Poilievre's been to New Brunswick. He's high-fived Blaine. He's tried to draw crowds. He was unsuccessful. The one event that he had here in St. John was plagued by protesters from CUPE, which we were there to support, as well as the Palestinian protesters. They were there outside, and let me tell you, for a room that can hold 800 people, seeing 100 and some like tables full,
Trickle
or
through.
150 people
Yeah,
across, like, I think it was like 60 70 tables. No, it was less than that tables. Like,
yeah.
the room had to be closed in so that it was not a crowd of people beaming
And
to get there.
the crowd, quote unquote, in Fredericton that Jenny Byrne herself was on saying there was 2,000 people at the
Yeah.
hotel. If anyone, like, this again, why Curse needs to actually talk to us. If anyone has gone to Fredericton and driven by the Fredericton Inn, you know for certain that that place does not hold anywhere near 2,000 people.
The
So,
occupancy load for that room is 300.
and I think they may have conjoined something to get it to 900. I'm being very generous here. But she was on there talking about 2000. Like,
No.
I used to listen to her on some podcasts, and
Yeah,
might have
she
been
used to be on Curse.
right. And it's like,
They're not going to like that we talk this way about Jenny. I mean, Jordan has never really said anything super supportive of Jenny, but Scott and David, for the legacy liberals that they are, they still love Jenny, and of course, so does Corey. But yeah, anyway,
I don't know.
that's our
Maybe that's why we're not going to get their attention.
yeah, maybe they're not
But
going
I
to
have
listen
a
to us.
big problem with her and these people that come and mess around with our stuff. I really do.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see it. I think that's why you need to pay attention to the New Brunswick election. I
Yep.
think that's why it matters here, because we're seeing a complete overhaul of the Conservative Party in New Brunswick. It
Yep.
looks like it's going to head toward a cliff. And here, let's segue into the opposition parties now. The
Mhm.
leading opposition party being the Liberals. I've certainly heard David Hurley give shout out to Susan Holt before.
Mhm.
Here's the thing: her fundraising numbers are really low. I said, we supported TJ Harvey and his bid for leadership. That's no secret. We've talked about that just because we were invited to. Like, at the end of the day, you and I are pretty similar in that we're less partisan and more person, and we will help people who give a compelling case to deserve our help. And so, TJ Harvey lost on the third ballot by like 60 votes to Susan, and there has not been a lot of cross pollination is a better word to put it, between TJ's group and Susan's group. Rob Govan, the PC turncoat, was the kingmaker on that, from what we understand, queenmaker in this case. But Susan still has an air of like opportunity and, hey, this is different, this is change. Woman premier would be our first. There is all of that, which is fine. But we've said this before. There isn't this colossal effort by the Liberals to be transformative.
Well, talk to us about your interaction around housing, because we are going to run out of time if we don't get there.
No, we'll get there. But give me your interaction there. I mean, you're running for the Greens, so you're biased.
Yes.
and you have those reasons. And so let's talk about some of those reasons, around why it is that you think other folks like yourself, because let's be clear, the Liberal Party right now and the candidates they're picking look pretty traditional. They look
Yeah.
older, white, and male,
And I've talked
and
about this
for
before
money.
on here, and I think, like, again, it's like it's the not whipped votes, it's the not doing the same thing over and over again, which is the definition of insanity. It's being open to a makeup of government that doesn't look like it ever has in New Brunswick, because we've just continuously been on this merry-go-round and we need to get off. And getting off, I think, means electing three parties into the legislature more fulsomely. And so I'd rather take what hopeful goodwill I've built here and transmit that into working with a party that I think deserves more space and time, which is the Greens. And they need to be sort of that healthy balancing voice in the room. We need to actually have discussions around the legislature instead of heavy-handedness.
Yeah.
And I don't like that it feels just like, okay, we're going to get in power and then it's all going to be our show and then everyone else can, F off. So, like, I don't like that. I don't think it's necessary. I think we need a balanced discussion, and that involves more than just two predominant voices at a table. It really
Yeah.
does.
And I'm with you. Like for me, it's like I don't really have a care in the world. I care about the issues. I care about decentralization. I care about more power to municipalities and local decision making. I care about all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the the it looks to me like when we reward the two main parties with power, with predominant power, that we get worse outcomes, right? We get less voices around the table, less alternatives are fought for. Like if we look at what the Liberals have brought to us through the collaboration with the NDP, I am somebody who's a working class individual, swings a hammer, not full time anymore, but like that's where I came from, and that's a lot of people are in the same income bracket I am, and a lot of us can now afford to get our kids to the dentist to get their teeth looked at, whereas before I would have only considered taking my kids to the dentist if I had a good tax return that year, or if they were complaining about their teeth, right? And I
Mhm.
hate to say that, sound like a bad parent, because my parents were able to bring me to the dentist every time for cleaning because they have coverage. I can't do that. I don't have coverage as an elected official, and I sure as hell don't have coverage as an entrepreneur working as an executive director for a nonprofit that I helped start. Like, I don't have that.
Yeah.
So it's like we have that now. And so if you're going to try to get people like me, you got to be willing to put really important big items in the window for transformative policies
Hmm.
and change making. Even if you're not going to get into policy stuff, convince me that you're going to make major change happen,
Yeah.
right? Because it looks to me like everything's worse, right? My
Yeah.
purchasing power is worse. My ability to afford a home is worse. My ability to buy groceries is worse. My ability to go on vacation is worse. Everything is worse than what my parents' generation was. And I think you would say the same.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then when it comes to housing, right? Like I put a post out, and our Susan puts a post out. This is an opportunity for the Liberals to demonstrate that they're going to score on the empty net of the housing crisis, because I'll tell you, the Higgs government has left an empty net open. They
Mhm.
have not been forward on this. They have left a lot to be desired on interaction. We have more homeless people in all of our cities in New Brunswick than we've ever had. People are outraged. It's scored as a really important issue for people, and we scored our government the worst out of any province on it.
Mhm.
And I said, Susan says, I'm devastated by the heart-wrenching news that two more people have lost their lives in an encampment fire in St. John. This government's utter lack of urgency in tackling the housing crisis, putting people in unsafe situations, and the premier is once again playing the blame game. We need a government that will plan ahead and act with care and urgency. And she says the whole government is committed to acting fast to help people who are unhoused. We need better planning and urgency from government. And I just, put a few things in the window, and she got into an argument with me on semantics about what I meant by right of first refusal for nonprofits and saying things like, well, we're committed to all these. Hi Brent, yes, we are committed to many of the items you've listed: rent cap, improved rent bank, RTA reforms, trades education, NFP, co-op housing, change of regs, all this. Some of this is going to happen in the first 100 days. And I said, now hold on a sec. Like, some of these are very specific, like use it or lose it legislation is a massive transformation in how we handle private property. Because if you're not building on your land, you should lose it. If you're living if you have an abandoned building that you're speculating on, you should lose it. Like, some of this stuff is that I laid out was very, very specific. And in the end of it, like, there was no, she's like, I don't copy your words, but the spirit is the same. For while others are slightly different and on technicalities or ambition, we haven't costed free trade school yet. I mean, free trade school is less than $7 million a year. Like, you add up the amount of seats in construction and carpentry across our community colleges and stuff like that, you're not looking at a big ticket item, but yet they look at that like, ooh, that could be a big cost. We had a $50 million surplus after we had, or we are predicting a $50 million surplus after we've had 3 years of nearly $1 billion surpluses year over year. And so if that's how you're engaging on this, I'm sorry, but like, you can't be grabbing a lot of people.
Yeah, we need free trade school. We need free nursing school. We need, like, I've been chatting around, and our universities, there's only so many of them. Like, there's no reason why we can't be the number one funder of education. Like, I just don't understand why that is such a difficult hill for anyone to look at as a negative.
Yeah, it's pretty low hanging fruit, right? Like, you look at it, I think we're putting out right around 300 nurses a year.
Maybe.
If
There's
that.
like, there's a
Well, they're
big
not all
issue.
staying here. I know they're not all
Yeah,
staying here,
yeah. No, it's
but
true.
like, I mean, Ontario's done some work around this, around like,
Yeah.
talking about funding for nursing education if you choose to sign a contract for multiple years and things like that, right? And if you break that contract, want to move, that's fine, but then you have to pay for your education. Yeah, we're not putting anything like that in the window.
No. When,
Not
again,
even our liberal government or our liberal opposition.
and it's a retention thing too, right? Like, I believe we want to keep people who grew up here. Um, and I was talking to someone recently about just the amount of people I went to school with who got their undergrad in psych, and how few of them were actually able to go on and get
That's
either
right.
a master's or a PhD to become a psychologist because of the lack of space that we have at the university level here. And low hanging fruit, man, like, it's completely low hanging fruit to figure out a way to get, like, the school psychologists we need, and b, the general practicing psychologists we need, with the given crisis around drug addiction and mental health that we know is happening here. And now we have instead a government that's trying to set up um a forced rehabilitation program. Like, it's outrageous, and not
Yeah.
willing to fund the mental
Well,
health support.
that's the hilarious part, is you got
Yeah.
Chris Austin, who, again, why aren't conservative pundits and conservative party leaders holding Blaine Higgs up as the example of what not to do? I
I
don't
know.
get it, because I get that he can draw the Christian national money that comes from groups like For My Canada down through the states, where they'll hold up this guy as being their pro Christ for the nation elected official, and they are, and it did come, and I get that. So there's money attached. There's motivation. There's a profit motivation. But at the end of the day, Tim Houston made the breakthrough that every conservative should be jealous of, right? And Doug Ford has held on to power that every conservative should be jealous of. Those two leaders have the hardest path to victory. Scott Moe, God, give me a break. Daniel Smith, even, give me a break. It's Alberta.
Well,
Like,
wasn't it very embarrassing, the premier's showings at Parliament for that hearing,
oh,
though?
Andrew Coyne ripped them a new on that. Where's that one? Who's
23.
554? Anyway, but like Andrew Coyne, commentator and columnist and journalist, conservative one at that for years, he absolutely ripped them up a new one. on how the premiers behaved and demonstrated themselves at this like anti-carbon tax rhetoric that they put out, because none of them, and even Scott Moe went on the record to say, actually, we looked at other options and they're all more expensive than the carbon tax, which it's like, exactly, you freaking idiot. Everybody looked at all the options and we landed on a price for pollution that looks like this,
Yeah.
and you're not putting anything new in the window. Anyway, but like instead you're going after transgender stuff like Blaine Higgs is. Like why aren't conservatives in this country who want a better pathway, because they don't get the electorate that more progressive parties do. They only have about 35% of the population that identify through and through as blue conservatives, right?
Yeah.
And like Tim Houston overcame that with a promise on healthcare that he's delivered on, and he's held on to popularity through it. Doug Ford, he was one of the most unpopular, or if not the most unpopular premier in the country, and managed to claw his way back, not by balancing budgets, but by trying to improve services and
Yeah.
changing the conversation and getting things done. The
Yeah.
Yes Express, all that stuff, you know. And Corey, tonight, if you're still listening to this, I hope you are, please tell me who you'd rather emulate, Blaine Higgs or Tim Houston,
Mm,
because they ain't the same conservative. And your boy Steve Outhouse is working for Blaine. And I don't understand it, because it's going to leave this party, the Progressive Conservative Party in New Brunswick, in shambles, potentially in shambles in such a way that it will set them back for 2 election cycles.
I think that the incumbents leaving the ship is easily going to do that. Like, I think that if anyone from the polling world can tell us um, what is the likelihood of somebody who's a brand new candidate to get in, uh, like it's not great. Like it isn't great. It takes
Yeah,
name recognition's huge in New Brunswick, and because people want to know who their MLA is so that they can go and knock on their door and feel comfortable doing so. So
yeah,
having to introduce a brand new personality into all these communities is a huge uphill battle. It's going to
yeah,
be huge.
yeah. It'll work in,
So,
Vaughan and York and
yeah.
all these other
Yeah.
places. It doesn't work in New Brunswick.
No. And
Parachuting a parachuting a Christian nationalist like Fatine into Hampton, New Brunswick ain't gonna do it.
that's the curse of NB Poli.
That's the curse of MB Polly. That's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, we never, what we didn't do at the top of the hour? We didn't give a shout out to our NB Polly, our politicos.
Oh yes.
So as always, thank you to our politicos, and we always name our politicos by name. Those of you who contribute to us on Patreon, here it is right here. You can find us, you can email us your questions at nbpolypod@gmail.com. You can donate to this show because we keep it ad free. We put this in our off hours. That's why it looks a little dark here, because we literally got done work. If I were to stand up, you'd see work pants and glue and a mess of glue on my sweater. I just ruined my sweater today. That's fun. And you got back from the college teaching over there, so here we are losing light. But if you do want to donate to our show to keep it ad free,
Yes.
patreon.com/nbpolypod. Thank you to Mark Brewer, who has his own podcast, NB Traveler. Thank you to Sean Rouse. Thank you to Fred LaForge, to our politicos who donate every month. And please consider any support at all to our initiative. There are a few of you who are giving us support each month. We love it. We love you.
Just throw us a follow, throw us a question. We love chatting with y'all on the internet, and stop us on the street too. We love that as well.
Yeah, getting the stop of the street's always a good thing.
Absolutely.
All right, folks. Until next week, I'm Brent Harris.
I'm Joanna Killen. Thank you for joining us. We will see you with more ramblings next week. Thank you all for joining us.